He was an 18th century Swedish scientist who made breakthroughs in physics, anatomy, and brain research. He was a religious visionary whose works have inspired writers such as Balzac, Blake, Emerson, Strindberg. His life was a relentless quest to discover the divine master plan. He was Emmanuel Swedenborg, the man who had to know.
To metaphysical Bible interpretation through his idea of the literal interpretation of the Bible corresponding to the natural characteristics of men, but that in the historical narratives, the Gospels, and the prophetic books, he believed there was an interior spiritual sense that is revealed to the person, the reader, the student, when his spiritual sight is opened, and that there is a metaphysical thread of meaning that runs through the whole. Now, obviously, this has influenced many. We mentioned some time ago that this obviously was an influence of Mary Baker Eddy, certainly was an influence on Charles Fillmore as he developed his own metaphysical interpretation, and the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and so forth reflects a great deal of the thinking and the methodical metaphysical interpretations of persons and of places and of conditions in the Bible and so forth.
Hello.
Oh, Catherine, this is Floyd De Beers, head of our department. He also took me on this magnificent boat ride today.
So good to meet you.
And so in return, I invited him to our house. Very unfair trade.
Well, I've heard wonderful things about you.
As I have you. George, is this some kind of setup?
What?
I swear to God, I didn't even tell her you were coming.
You see, George, you see? There are no coincidences.
I'm sorry, I was taken by the artwork and I picked it up. I just started reading it.
Nothing to be sorry for.
You do know what this is, don't you? The cover art. It's a soul transitioning into the afterlife.
Really?
The painter followed Swedenborg, so he believed that death is parallel to birth, but divine.
Floyd, believe me, you do not want to get my wife started on all that stuff. Kat, please, show Floyd around. I'm going to fix us some cocktails.
My daughter's asleep already, but we can peek in her room. We actually have 4 bedrooms, but we only use 2 of them.
A young couple can't have too many beds.
You okay?
We're not alone, are we?
What do you mean?
She doesn't mean any harm. She has reasons.
And George Clare came to me. I was very interested in writing about the Hudson River Valley. This region is absolutely, as you know, so beautiful.
Yes.
And the landscape here is really characteristic of a particular kind of wilderness beauty that was captured, obviously, in the Hudson River School by the Hudson River School painters like George Inness. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to write about an art historian? And so that's how I began to explore this character of George Clare, who is actually a very deeply troubled guy, a very dark personality, Somebody described him as having a dark soul, and I think that's really true, And so as I began to explore, I decided he would be an expert on George Inness, one of my favorite painters from the Hudson River School. And so when I started to explore George Inness, the painter, I realized that he was very, not only like most of the Hudson River School painters, very captivated and very interested in nature and trying to express a kind of spirituality through nature. But he was also a Swedenborgian, and you probably never even heard of Swedenborg. I had never heard of him. He was an 18th century Swedish philosopher, and he believed very strongly in the presence of heaven and hell, and very strongly believed in God, and of course. And Inness really prescribed to this kind of, spiritual rubric that he used in his painting. And I thought, wow, this is a great way for me to kind of look at all these very interesting questions about life and death and ghosts and, how we behave towards one another as people and all of these big questions. So that became a great theme. So that's how I sort of evolved into George Clare's character.
The book is all...
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another deep dive with me. Today we're going to be continuing our series on Emmanuel Swedenborg. But today we will, instead of looking at the other three principles from the Alice B. Skinner article, we'll continue by talking about the nature of spiritual reality, the science of spiritual reality, but actually not through as scientific a lens as we did last time, but through a more artistic lens. We'll be looking at Swedenborg as a blueprint for spiritual living through art and perception. And we'll also be talking about his ideas of heaven and hell, how heaven and hell correspond to the human soul, and how we can create heaven or hell for ourselves here and now on this earth. Emmanuel Swedenborg's 18th century revelations unveiled a radical vision. That is, that our world is a living metaphor where every person, place, and object vibrates with hidden spiritual meaning. The principle of correspondence, again, that material reality mirrors divine truths, as above, so below, as below, so above, transforms how we understand our choices, our struggles, and even the art we create. So the Netflix film Things Seen and Heard, which you just saw a clip from, and also the author who wrote the original novel that it was based on. The film brings the philosophy of Swedenborg to chilling life, showing how moral corruption warps reality itself. The painter George Inness and architect Joseph Worcester took Swedenborg's ideas even further, using brushstrokes as blueprints. Using brushstrokes and blueprints to map the soul's journey. Blueprints because he was an architect, Worcester. Their work proves that heaven and hell aren't just destinations, but they're states of beings that we cultivate daily through thought, action, and creativity. So in this exploration, we'll decode how Swedenborg's correspondences turn ordinary life into a sacred text that can be metaphysically read. Why your own personal hell might be a self-made prison of deceit, as depicted in the film Things Seen and Heard. The secret language of spiritual art, from Inness's haunted landscapes to Worcester's soul-stirring chapels, and then practical ways to remake your world using these 250-year-old truths from Emmanuel Swedenborg. So prepare to see your existence anew. Prepare to see a world where shadows hold meaning, light reveals destiny, and you become both the artist and the masterpiece in the living universe.
Orthodox 18th century notions of the afterlife were rather simplistic. On the day of judgment, the graves open, and each person is resurrected with a physical body to face a celestial bureaucracy. Swedenborg refuted these notions in several books. This greatly upset traditionalists, such as his friend Reverend Ferelius.
You are a learned man, sir, versed in scriptures. Surely you can understand, despite whatever things your spirits tell you. It is like our courts of law. On the day of judgment, the pious are rewarded, the wicked are punished.
Now, each of us is his own judge, for heaven and hell are also within us. We are each living eternity now.
Swedenborg wrote that we experience heaven and hell on earth, and that the worlds beyond the grave are extensions of the psychological realities of daily life.
Death is not an extinction, but a continuation of life, merely a transition from one state to another.
In several visions, Swedenborg experienced the process of dying and saw others enter the afterlife. He said that immediately following death, there's a period of self-discovery. The social masks worn on earth dissolve away, and the true self is revealed. Each person then shapes his own eternity to correspond with his real inner nature. Some become irrational, driven by fear and greed. They are in a state Swedenborg called hell. Hell is a psychological condition which corresponds to the suffering we experience on earth when we allow ourselves to be driven by the blind greed of our own egos. There are no devils here to inflict punishments, since in the state of hell, each person acts out his own malice by tormenting others.
Really, sir? No devil?
But, your lordship, you mean to say there aren't no devils?
No devils, no demons. Such is the equilibrium of everything in the other life, that one brings punishment and torment unto himself.
After death, others find within themselves a psychological state Swedenborg called heaven. It is a joyous condition, a state of expanded awareness, of perceiving more and more of the grand plan of creation. The heaven which Swedenborg experienced corresponds to deeds, not creeds. So persons of many races and religions form the societies of heaven, which Swedenborg often called the Church of the Lord.
My friend, how can your so-called Church of the Lord include heathens and idolaters? Surely the Lord will cast them into the pit of hell.
The Church of the Lord consists of all those who have lived in the good of charity according to their own belief. The Church of the Lord is universal.
Good day, my friend.
As Swedenborg approached the end of his life, his writings continued to be unacceptable to the officialdom of the Church of Sweden. This posed a problem for Reverend Ferelius, who in the winter of 1772 was coming to visit Swedenborg for the last time.
have been ill, my friend. Have you considered that perhaps you might soon
Die? Yes. Soon it will be my time to die.
Are you willing to receive the Lord's Supper?
With thankfulness. Have you read my views on the true meaning of communion?
No, I'm sorry. I cannot say that I have. Do you acknowledge yourself to be a sinner?
Certainly, as long as I have to carry around this sinful body.
My friend, quite a number of people think that your sole purpose in promulgating this new theological system has been to make a name for yourself. If such be the case, you ought now to do the world and yourself the justice to retract it, either in whole or in part, especially if you cannot expect to derive any additional advantage in this world, which you will soon be leaving.
When you enter eternity, you will see everything. And then you and I shall have much to talk about.
Before their parting, Swedenborg presented Reverend Ferelius with one of the last copies of his book, Heavenly Secrets. But Swedenborg was to leave another minister a somewhat more unusual token of his abilities.
Things Seen and Heard has been... oh, by the way, the novel is called All Things Cease to Appear, which is from George Inness. And actually, Things Seen and Heard is a quote from Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell. It's been described as a Swedenborgian thriller and draws inspiration from the teachings of Emmanuel Swedenborg on the themes of spirits and the afterlife. And we'll get into a little bit Swedenborg's view of the afterlife today. In the Netflix film, George Inness's painting, The Valley of the Shadow of Death, serves as a multi-layered symbol that reinforces the movie's themes, which include the themes of spiritual duality, as above, so below, as below, so above. Although, you know, we're really talking about non-duality in New Thought, and that's what Swedenborg was talking about as well. So seeing it as duality is not exactly accurate, but looking at the correspondences between those different layers of truth. It also deals with Swedenborgian themes of hidden truths and moral corruption. Some of the themes in the film, as well as the novel, include the George Inness's painting's imagery, which is a twilight landscape with a looming cross, which mirrors the film's eerie atmosphere and hints at the boundary between the living and the dead. Just as Inness's work depicts a soul's transition into the spiritual realm, which is described in the film, the protagonist, Catherine, played by Amanda Seyfried, grapples with ghostly encounters and unsettling revelations. The film draws from Emmanuel Swedenborg's ideas of correspondences and the afterlife, which we talked about last time. Not as much about the afterlife, though, but the afterlife was very much tied to Swedenborg's ideas of correspondence. The painting's emphasis on faith amid darkness parallels Catherine's journey. The character. She must navigate deception and supernatural threats without clear guidance. George Clyde, played by James Norton, is Catherine's husband, and he's an art professor who specializes in Inness. His focus, his scholarly focus, his research into spiritual art contrasts with his own moral decay, his infidelity, his manipulation of others. He becomes sort of a shady character, as the author pointed out. The painting then becomes an ironic symbol. It symbolizes divine truth, while George embodies spiritual falsehood. George, also the character shares a first name with the painter. George embodies spiritual falsehood. Remember, we talked about spiritual reality last time. And this echoes Swedenborg's warnings about deceitful souls in the afterlife. This idea, which we did talk about last time as well, that theological debates continue after. Other Swedenborgian themes in Inness's paintings include the idea of divine influx, which we talked about last time. Swedenborg taught that God's presence flows into nature like sunlight, but there's also an efflux, as Walt Whitman talked about. Inness's Valley of the Shadow of Death and The Home of the Heron from 1893 used diffused golden light to suggest spiritual permeation or divine influx. Also, themes of harmony and correspondence pervade Inness's work. Swedenborg believed that all things in nature reflect higher truths. In Inness's work, Peace and Plenty from 1865, he presents a harvest scene, not just as a farmland, but also as a symbol of divine presence. Inness also reflects Swedenborg's ideas of the afterlife as an inner state. Swedenborg rejected static heaven and hells and instead described them as extensions of one's inner life. Inness's Sunset in the Woods from 1891, with its dissolving forms and glowing horizons, evokes this transitional spiritual realm. Inness said the material world is but a shadow of the spiritual, and art must strive to reveal that hidden reality. For Inness, Swedenborg's theology was not just a belief system, but a visual language. Inness transformed landscapes into portals of divine presence. His works remain testaments to Swedenborg's enduring idea that the visible world is a mirror of the invisible, and art can be a bridge between the two. According to Swedenborg, all things in heaven correspond to something in man, and from this correspondence, the spiritual is made visible in the natural. Through Inness's luminous landscapes, Swedenborg's vision of an interconnected spiritual universe found its fullest expression.
Visual token of his abilities.
Reading this, I felt my heart strangely warmed.
The England in which Swedenborg spent his last months witnessed the growth of several new Protestant sects. One of these was Methodism. Its founder was John Wesley.
That he had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. Every man and...
A letter for you, sir.
This is highly peculiar. It was only days ago. A most curious letter was delivered to me. I remember it exactly. It said, "Sir, I have been informed in the world of spirits that you have a strong desire to converse with me. I shall be happy to see you if you will favor me with a visit. I am, sir, your humble servant, Emmanuel Swedenborg." I felt exceedingly astonished, for I had been strongly impressed with a desire to see and converse with this gentleman. I sent a reply at once, stating I am at present closely occupied in preparing for a 6-month journey, but will do the pleasure of waiting upon Mr. Swedenborg soon after my return to London. And now, this. Sir, I am sorry to reply that your proposed visit will be too late, as next month, on March 29th, 1772, I shall enter the world of spirits, never more to return. Your humble servant, Emmanuel Swedenborg.
Another person who used Swedenborgian ideas in their art and in their work was Joseph Worcester, who was an architect, and he designed buildings that reflected Swedenborg's belief that material forms should express spiritual harmony. Worcester was born in 1836 and died in 1913. He was a Swedenborgian minister and self-taught architect who believed that buildings should embody spiritual principles and not merely serve functional needs. He was influenced by Emmanuel Swedenborg's doctrine of correspondences, the idea that physical forms mirror heavenly truths. Worcester designed structures that evoked balance, simplicity, and sacred geometry. His most famous work is the Swedenborgian Church of San Francisco, which was designed in 1895, also known as the Church of New Jerusalem. It stands as a testament to his belief that architecture could elevate the soul. According to Swedenborg, the whole natural world corresponds to the spiritual world, not just in general, but in every detail. Worcester took this literally, insisting that architectural elements, proportion, light, and material should reflect divine order. His principles included organic simplicity. Rejecting ornate Victorian excess, Worcester favored natural materials, including redwood and stone, and handcrafted details, believing humility in design mirrored spiritual purity. There was another principle of harmonious proportions, again that idea of harmony using that musical metaphor, which we'll talk about in the future, but inspired by Swedenborg's assertion that heaven's beauty lies in perfect ratios, such as the golden ratio. Worcester used the golden section to create subliminally pleasing spaces. Light as divine presence, that was another of Swedenborg's principles that Worcester used. The stained glass and strategically placed windows bathed interiors in soft, diffused light, symbolizing Swedenborg's concept of divine wisdom flowing in the influx of the Spirit, just like sunlight. Co-designed with architects A. Page Brown and Bernard Maybach, the Swedenborgian Church of San Francisco is a masterpiece of symbolic architecture. It has redwood columns which were left unvarnished to honor Swedenborg's teaching that truth should be unadorned. It has 12 supporting beams representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and per Swedenborg, the 12 faculties of the human soul, which also influenced Charles Fillmore's idea of the 12 powers. There's a central hearth in the building. A fireplace anchors the sanctuary, symbolizing Swedenborg's idea that divine love is a refining fire. Worcester says a church should not overpower, but invite. A quiet forest glade where heaven whispers to the earth. While other contemporary Gilded Age architects like Richard Morris Hunt built grand neoclassical monuments, Worcester's work aligned with the arts and crafts movement, emphasizing craftsmanship and spiritual integrity over opulence, and the utopian idea that art belonged to everybody, not just to the rich, that art is for the people, and everything should be adorned and beautiful to praise God. Swedenborg's seminal concept of correspondentia, correspondence, posits that the phenomenal world constitutes a symbolic lexicon of spiritual realities. So what the ancients called natura naturata and Swedenborg termed ultimate forms provides an ontological basis for cognitive reframing. So here's a practical application. When encountering adversity, why not ask, why is this happening? But what divine grammar, ask not, why is this happening? But instead, what divine grammar might this circumstance express? Sometimes spirit is trying to tell us something, and sometimes we have to go through what H.M. Katie calls chemicalization to deal with it, a little bit of a chemical reaction, which sometimes causes a little bit of a feeling of struggle. In terms of finances, we can follow the Swedenborgians of the early American New Church, like the abolitionist financiers Robert Carter III, who emancipated 455 enslaved persons after his conversion to Swedenborgianism, demonstrating how monetary systems should reflect spiritual priorities. Swedenborg's radical concept of spiritual equality had tangible consequences. In Britain, for example, New Church minister Thomas Goyder's 1833 sermon on Christianity and colonial slavery contrasted, that's the title of Thomas Goyder's 1833 work, became a theological foundation for abolitionism.
The ideas of love and wisdom are a core dualism running through Swedenborg's teachings, one that is manifested in any number of correspondences will be saved.
So I'd like to conclude with a practical application of how we can use these ideas in our work, in our art, and in our life. Swedenborg's seminal concept of correspondentia posits that the phenomenal world constitutes a symbolic lexicon of spiritual realities. What the ancients called natura naturata and Swedenborg termed ultimate forms proves an ontological basis for cognitive reframing. So when you encounter adversity, don't ask, why is this happening to me? But instead ask, what divine grammar might this circumstance express? Sometimes spirit is trying to tell us things that we don't quite get. In the film Things Seen and Heard, George Inness's paintings and Swedenborgian philosophy offer profound insights that can be applied to personal growth and spiritual development. So here's how you might integrate these ideas into your life. Embrace the concept of correspondences, the idea of material reflecting the spiritual. Swedenborg taught that the physical world mirrors spiritual truths. This invites mindfulness about how your surroundings, habits, and relationships affect your inner state. You may want to take action by decluttering your space. As Marie Kondo, the TV star, asks, does this spark joy? Ask yourself that question about your possessions. If not, it may be limiting you. Release it. Just as Worcester's architecture emphasized harmony, organize your environment to reflect clarity and purpose. And you may even find feng shui principles to be helpful in arranging and organizing your home. Use art as a form of meditation. Surround yourself with art or nature that evokes peace, just like Inness's landscapes. This will cultivate inner stillness. If you change the external, sometimes you can affect an internal change. Just as when you make an internal change, you affect the external. You may want to do journaling. I always think writing things down is a really good liminal process between manifestation, material manifestation, and the thought of the divine mind. So when you write something down, you put it in this liminal area where it's between thought and manifestation. Reflect on how daily events might symbolize deeper spiritual or emotional lessons in your journal. Do metaphysics of your own life. Think about how what you're experiencing may in fact be a lesson for you. Navigate your own valley of the shadow of death, as Inness's painting is called. This includes your trials and your transformations in life. This includes a process of chemicalization, as H. Emily Cady talks about, when truth is poured in and there's a chemical reaction that may even cause feelings like Jesus had in Gethsemane of strife and anxiety. But the action steps that you can take are to reframe your challenges, so you can view difficulties instead of problems that are happening to you as opportunities for spiritual and emotional advancement. Much like Catherine's ordeal in the film Seen and Heard, you can put faith in uncertainty, embrace the mystery, practice trusting the process when outcomes are unclear, like career shifts or relationships. This is like the light of faith that Inness depicted. Be receptive to influx of divine light. In Unity, we talk about let go and let God. Seek symbolic guidance. Use literature, art, or films to find parallels to your own life and derive strength. But there's a limit to that. Remember that not everyone's vision is applicable to your problems. Align actions with spiritual consequences. In the film and Swedenborg, they stress that choices have cosmic significance beyond immediate consequences. You may want to take steps doing ethical auditing. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they call this a fearless moral inventory. Regularly assess whether your actions align with your values. If your values are honesty, are you being truthful in your affairs? If your values are kindness, are you exhibiting that love to those who you come across? Are you seeing others the way God sees them, as part and parcel of God? As George Clyde, the character in Things Seen and Heard, his hypocrisy led to his downfall, so too we must look out for limiting hypocrisies that we have in our life. Cultivate inner light. This again is Swedenborg's idea of divine influx. Inness's use of light also symbolizes that divine wisdom that permeates reality. So some steps you can take might be to do a morning ritual. Start the day with a sunlight meditation, perhaps. Or imagine light as clarity or grace filling your mind. Do sun salutations yoga. You may want to do gratitude practice. Note moments where light, joy, insight, connection break through your daily struggles and keep them in mind. I think oftentimes we focus on our struggles rather than our triumphs. So keep those triumphs in your mind. Count your blessings, as the Bible says. Architect your life like Worcester's designs. Worcester's buildings balance simplicity, function, and sacred meaning. So some steps you can take based on Worcester's ideas: simplify intentionally, reduce distractions, take a break from social media, from digital and material distractions, connect with nature, go on walks, go out into the woods, literally touch grass. Create a space for what truly matters. You may want to set aside an area in your house that is a sacred space for prayer and meditation, that maybe you put some things that have spiritual meaning in there for you, whether they be statues or other symbolic kinds of objects. Design, again, you may want to have this part of your home reflect nature and reflect divine principles. You may want to use natural materials. You may want to have soft light. You may want to have inspiring artworks and other things that facilitate a feeling of a sacred space. Balance aesthetics and purpose. Align your daily routines, your work relationships with deeper meanings, not just surface level goals. Explore the afterlife as an inner state. Heaven and hell in Swedenborg's teachings are extensions of one's inner life, not just destinations. So, some ways you can actualize this in your life is to use mindfulness, cultivate inner peace now. Your present mindset shapes your eternal state, because all that exists is the now. Release negativity. Release resentment and deceit, like George's, which creates a hellish inner world. Practice forgiveness and authenticity. You may want to use art and story for self-reflection. In Things Seen and Heard, and in the paintings of George Inness and the architecture of Worcester, these examples serve as mirrors for self-examination. Some ways we can apply this may be to watch and read things reflectively. After engaging with art or media, ask, what did this reveal about my fears, desires, or hidden truths? Know thyself. Use your power of discernment, which Charles Fillmore talks about as one of the 12 powers. You may want to use creative expression. Process emotion through paintings, writings, or music. Channel Inness's method of making the spiritual tangible. Art should be a channeling exercise, whether you're aware of it or not. So remember Inness's idea that the material world is but the shadow of the spiritual. Remember to look beyond the surface of appearances in relationships, work, and self-understanding. By applying these principles, you can transform abstract philosophy into daily practices that foster resilience, mindfulness, and a deeper connection to the unseen dimensions of life. Just as Inness painted light emerging from darkness, you can frame your own growth as a journey through shadows towards illumination. You may want to maintain what is in Latin called a liber correspondentarium, a document of daily synchronicities between external events and internal states, just as Worcester did when designing the first Swedenborgian Church of San Francisco. If you're experiencing anxiety, you may ask Swedenborg's question, what spiritual lesson is this situation mirroring? Swedenborg's journals show how challenges, which he calls vastatio, purify the soul for greater joy. For relationships, the New Church abolitionists, for example, applied this to their life by seeing the divine in all people, even those society rejected. Their correspondence journal, you could try their correspondence journal technique. Each night, write one way your relationship reflected your inner growth. Each night, write one way your relationships reflected your inner growth. So in conclusion, we can live Swedenborg's vision of correspondence, heaven and hell, and the power of art by applying Swedenborg's principles. His teachings reveal a universe where material and spiritual realms mirror one another, and where every action, object, and artistic expression holds deeper meaning. By understanding his principles of correspondence, the nature of heaven and hell, and the divine purpose of art, we can transform not only how we see the world, but how we live within it. Swedenborg taught that the physical world is a reflection of our deeper spiritual truths. Just as Inness's paintings use landscapes to symbolize the soul's journey, and Worcester designed buildings to embody divine harmony, our own lives can be seen as living symbols. We may want to view challenges as spiritual lessons. Your struggles are not just random, but part of a larger inner transformation. Seek meaning in everyday details. Does your environment reflect chaos or peace? What does that say about your inner state? Remember, there's an influx and efflux. Heaven and hell are inner realities, not distant realms, but extensions of the human heart. The film Things Seen and Heard dramatizes this idea. George Clyde's moral decay traps him in a self-made hell, while Catherine's awakening moves her towards truth, a kind of heaven. Practical application could be incorporating heaven in your life. Heaven is then a state of love, wisdom, and alignment with the divine. You can cultivate it through kindness, honesty, and self-awareness. In all things, practice love. That's the greatest commandment. Hell, on the other hand, is a prison of selfishness and deceit. Deny it, avoid it by rejecting manipulation, resentment, and ego. Ask yourself, am I creating heaven or hell within myself and for those around me? Again, you may want to ask yourself, am I creating heaven or am I creating hell within myself and for those around me? Art can be used as a bridge between worlds. Inness and Worcester use Swedenborg's ideas to prove that art and architecture are not just aesthetic, they are spiritual acts. A painting can be a portal to divine truth. A building can be a hymn in wood and stone. Surround yourself with art, music, and spaces that elevate your soul, just as Worcester did with his sacred design. Express your inner journey creatively, whether through writing, painting, or even arranging your home with intention. Remember Swedenborg's insight that the material world is but the shadow of the spiritual. Let your life and creations cast a meaningful shadow. Finally, become the artist of your own soul. Swedenborg's vision teaches us that we are both the painter and the painting, the architect and the temple. Each choice we make, every truth we seek, and every lie we resist shapes not just our destiny, but the very fabric of the spiritual world. So ask yourself, what does my life correspond to? Am I building a heaven of love or a hell of deception? How can I, like Inness and Worcester, turn my experience into a work of sacred art? The answers to these questions will guide you towards a life where the seen and the unseen, the earthly and the divine are forever entangled and intertwined, just as Swedenborg promised. Let go and let God, and so be it. Amen.
Never lose an opportunity of seeing anything that is beautiful, for beauty is God's handwriting, a wayside sacrament. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Swedenborg was probably the most important influence in the development of spiritualism, in theosophy, in anthroposophy, and at least in certain aspects of the Rosicrucian order. Though, as we'll point out in a few moments, the early beginnings of the Rosicrucian system are pretty vague and hazy.